Hey everyone, this is going to be part 2 of coding the captain backtest model. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, I would highly recommend doing so, as we kind of go over all the logic that was in the open source TradingView indicator. And so you should have a better idea of all the functions that we're going to write in NinjaTrader. So to get started with NinjaTrader, what we're going to do is select new and then strategy builder. And you're just going to hit next here, call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call this CB locked, because what we're going to have to do is make a copy of this and unlock the code. It's just something you have to do with NinjaTrader. I'm not going to get into the details, but you can go next here. And this is where you can kind of set all of your default properties and stuff and your input values. But we're going to be doing all that from scratch anyway. So I'm just going to skip ahead to finish. I'm going to click finish here. And now I'm going to go again to the strategy builder. And this time from the strategy builder, I'm going to select from this dropdown. I'm going to go to CB locked, which we just created, and I'm going to do save as, and I'm going to call it CB unlocked. I'm going to go next, and now I'm going to go to unlock code. And it's going to give you this message that says, after unlocking, you can manually edit the wizard generated code. However, you will no longer be able to configure the strategy with this wizard right here. And I'm just going to click yes, because we're going to code the whole thing. And you should be met with this window with all of your code. I'm going to try to keep it zoomed in here for people that are viewing on smaller screens. But basically what I'm going to do is I have the finished code that I made previously, and I'm just going to walk through all the steps to bring that all over to a new script and code everything from scratch. So first and foremost, what I want to do is transfer over all of my input values. So basically after this onBar update function, we can go outside of it and set a new region for properties. And this will be all of our input values. I'm just going to copy these in and explain them really quick so we don't spend too much time on them, because most of this was explained in the TradingView part, but it's just a little different on how you actually get them into NinjaTrader. So you can see for each one here is defined with this NinjaScript property, and this stuff is basically equivalent to my previous range that I was defining in TradingView, where it's ultimately going to be a default value of 6 o'clock here and 10 o'clock here, but we're going to be treating them as integer values, which you see here, public int, previous start, range from 0 to the maximum value that an integer can have. And same thing here, public int, previous end. Then I have my bias window, which is going to be from 10 to 11:15. Again, I'm going to have it as an integer, take start and take end. Then I have my actual trade window, which is going to be from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And I have public int trade start and trade end. And notice too that I'm trying to keep everything a little bit organized by assigning these group names to each parameter. So everything concerning these time windows has a group name of time. Everything concerning strategy stuff, as far as retracements, stop orders, fixed risk to reward, that has a group name of strategy. And then finally, my risk and reward have a group name of risk. So just trying to separate everything, make it a little clean, similar to the TradingView indicator. But again, so after this trade window, I have my retracement criteria here, where I have criteria 1 and criteria 2. Now, since these are just Boolean values, I don't need to have this range from 0 or, some number to another number. It's just true or false. So I can just do public bool, retrace 1, retrace 2. Same thing for use stop orders and use fixed risk to reward. Again, same settings in TradingView, just a little different on how you actually code them in here. And then finally, I had public doubles here for risk and reward. The reason these are doubles and not int values is that they can be decimal values for fractional risk and reward and not just whole numbers. Now, the next thing I want to do is just set the default values for all these inputs. And where we're going to do that is right here where it says if state equals state.set defaults. I'm just going to paste mine in here, and they should be the same exact values as was in TradingView. So we have the previous range start as 6 o'clock, and these are in the form of 2 digits for the hour, 2 digits for the minute, 2 digits for the second. So for here, I have 6 o'clock. And there's no AM or PM required because, for example, down here, when you have trade end, this is going to be the 16th hour. So it's just military time, no AM or PM. But so previous start as 6 o'clock, previous end as 10. The beginning of when we can take the range is 10 o'clock, and the end of that is 11:15. Now our trade window starts at 10 o'clock, and it ends at 4 o'clock PM. And then by default, we're just setting both retracement criteria equal to true, stop orders to false, fixed risk to reward to true. Doesn't really matter. We'll see how we can play with them later. And then risk to reward to 25 and 75 respectively. Now, similar to how we had all these variables that were tracking our previous range highs and lows, our bias, long and short, and all that stuff, we want to do the same thing. And to do that, we have to do a few different steps. So we basically need to make those declarations right outside of the onState change function. And how we would do that is just to private series. And for this one, I'm going to be using a double. And I'm going to be tracking the range high. So the range from 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock, this is going to be the high. Then I'm going to do the same thing for the low. I'm going to do the same thing for bias, except instead of having it be a Boolean value of true, false, or NA in TradingView, I'm just going to have this as an int in NinjaTrader, where it's going to be 0 for no bias, 1 for long, and -1 for short. Then I'm going to do the same thing for that opposite close parameter, and for took high and low, and also for is long and is short. Then I'm just going to do the same thing for the time parameters of T. Then I'm just going to do the same thing for the time parameters of the previous range, our take range, and our trade window. And a few more here. I'm just going to do private int last trades equals 0, then prior number of trades equals 0, and prior session trades equals 0. So notice that these don't have to be series values. These do, because for these ones, we are going to be looking at historical data, similar to how in TradingView, we're checking statements like this, where we're saying if we're not in the trade window, but we were in the trade window 1 bar ago, we are accessing historical values from 1 bar ago. And in order to do that in NinjaTrader, you have to define these series. Otherwise, this will just be a static value. Otherwise, instances like this will just be a static value until we change them. But we don't need to look at these in the past, so it doesn't really matter. This part is a little bit different from TradingView, and this is just going to be able to help us track how many trades we've taken in a day. And in this case, we only want to take 1. And it's a pretty simple function to be able to limit how many trades you take from a given strategy. So I figured I'd throw that in there. Now we can finally go into the on-bar update for the core logic of the script. And the first thing I'm going to do is just give it a little bit of a buffer by saying if current bar is less than 3, then I'm just going to return or, just do nothing. And the reason for this is that certain functions are looking in the past to determine what's happening. And so if we're on the very first bar that's being generated by the chart, we can't look into the past. So we're just skipping that for now. Now what I want to do from the TradingView version is define when our times are valid. And so in TradingView, it's pretty straightforward. In NinjaTrader, we have a little bit of a workaround, but we can say T for the previous range at the current bar for 0 with bar is equal to this function that we're going to write called check time that takes our previous start time that we defined as our input and previous end time that's also an input. I'm just going to paste that and do the same thing for T trade and T take as well, knowing that we also have to change the start and end times to take start and take end, and also trade start and trade end. So with that, it would probably be good to write this function really quick. And the reason we're using a function here is because how we're managing time as an integer value instead of, an actual date time object. So for example, if you were concerned about a range of time from 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock, let's say, you could check if the current time resides in that range by saying, if the current time is greater than 10 o'clock and less than 12 o'clock, or in other words, greater than T1 and less than T2. But let's say you wanted to have a strategy that was checking an overnight range, for example, from 10 o'clock at night to 2 o'clock in the morning. Then if we're saving the times as integer values, 10 o'clock at night is going to be the 22nd hour, and 2 o'clock in the morning is going to be the 2nd hour. So in that instance, you can't check if price is greater than 22 and less than 2. It's just not going to work. So you just need to have a workaround that switches those two values in the case where time 1 is greater than time 2. And that should make sense as we write it out a little bit. So there's going to be a private bool function. In other words, it's going to return a true or false value. It's going to be called check time, and it's going to be taking an integer value of time 1 and an integer value of time 2. We're going to start by saying bool results equals false. And if either condition is true and our time is valid, then we'll set it to true. So we're going to look for the current time t with this function toTime of the current bar. So if the current bar is occurring at 8 o'clock a.m., then it's just going to return in that format that we saw before, where it's just going to be 080000. So like we said before, if time 1 is greater than time 2, then our result will be true if the time is greater than time 1 or less than time 2. And just to write it out a little bit, we can say, for example, time 1 is equal to, again, let's say 10 o'clock p.m., which would be the 22nd hour, and time 2 equals 2 a.m., which would be 020000. So since time 1 is greater than time 2, we would only be in this range if the current time was greater than or equal to this value, or after midnight, it resets to 0, and it's less than or equal to this value. So that's the condition where T1 is greater than T2. Else we want to just check it regularly and say results. We can say T is greater than or equal to T1, and it's less than or equal to T2. And then we're just going to return this result. So that's our function. Now we can go back to onBar update, and I want to be tracking our bias, and how we're going to do that is just make sure that it's equal to the previous value. So I'm going to say bias for the current bar, or the 0th index, is going to be bias from the previous bar. And that's partially why we had to do this current bar is less than 3, because on the very first bar of the chart, there is no bias from 1 bar ago. Now what we can do is check if we can even trade in the first place. And for that, I just want to check if we've taken a trade at all in the current day. So we can set another bool variable, let's say can trade, and we're going to write another function called took trade, and we're going to check if that value is false. And this is a function that I just got off of one of the NinjaTrader forums, which are extremely helpful. And it's pretty straightforward, so I'm just going to paste the logic in here because it has a couple of notes that could be helpful. So I modified this function a little bit after getting it from the forum. Basically, all we need here is this trade variable to be set to false initially. And then on the very first tick of a brand new session, we want to set this prior session trades variable to the current number of trades that this has taken. And then at any point after that, if we have taken a trade, this systemperformance.alltrades.count will update. And so we can check if the difference between these two values is greater than 0, then we know that we took a trade, and we can return the trade variable equal to true. So going back up here, we know that when this is false, then we are able to take new trades. So now I just want to set our profit target and stop loss values, and we have functions for that. So set profit target, and I'm going to use calculation mode of ticks, and I'm going to take our reward input and divide it by the tick size of the current chart. Because if you remember, we defined our reward in points. So if we're on NASDAQ, for example, and we had, say, a 25-point reward, there are 4 ticks in a point. So that would be 100 ticks, and we need to account for that. Then I'm also just going to set our stop loss, also with calculation mode.ticks, and I'm just going to change this to risk divided by tick size. So with that out of the way, we can start doing our logic to assess the previous range from 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock. Resetting all of our values, evaluating the range where we have to take the high or the low, and eventually decide whether we can take a trade. So I'm going to start that with a function called the previous range that we're going to define right here. And I'm going to do private void because it's not going to return everything. Previous range. So similar to our bias, I want to make sure that the range high of the current bar is equal to the range high of the last bar, unless we encounter a new window of time. And our range low is equal to the range low from 1 bar ago. So now we can check if we have just entered the 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock range. We can check that by saying if T from the previous range of the 0th bar, and we're just going to do another check for that current bar greater than 3. We can check for a couple things. So one condition would be if we are on the very first bar of that 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock range, we would know that by saying if the current time is valid in that range, and also the time from 1 bar ago was not valid. So just like that. In that case, then we just set the range high to the current bar's high and the range low to the current bar's low. Otherwise, we're going to enter this statement if it's any other bar besides the very first one. And similar to TradingView, we're just going to take the max of the previous bar's range high and the current bar's high. And for the range low, we're going to take the minimum value of the range low and the current bar's low. And that's all we need to do for the 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock range. And next in the onBar update, we can call our reset function, which is just going to reset all of our values after a trade window has ended. So we can do another private void reset. And again, if the current bar is equal to 3, we're just kind of being safe here to make sure we don't run into any issues with that. We're checking if we're no longer in the trade window. So we can say if not T trade of the current bar, and also T trade of the previous bar. So not valid on the current bar, valid on the previous bar. That would mean that we have just exited the trade window. And if that's the case, we can say reset our bias to 0. Is long is going to be false. Is short is going to be false. And then everything else is just going to be false or 0. We have opposite close, took high low, and that should be all we need for that function. Now we can go into the take range where we have to take either end of the 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock high or low. That will also be a void function. It's not going to return anything. And I'm not too concerned about the actual chart drawings for this one in NinjaTrader. But right here, we're just going to do a couple things where if our bias is long, then we're going to just draw an up arrow where that occurs. If our bias is short, we're going to draw a down arrow. And then if price takes either end of the range, we're going to draw out a couple lines denoting the range high and range low from 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock. So we're going to start with this bool draw equals false. And then if we are in the range where we can take the high or the low, and current bar is greater than 3. So it's going to be the same thing in TradingView where we're checking if bias hasn't yet been determined and the high exceeds the range high from 6 to 10, then we're going to set our bias to long and we're going to draw that little arrow. So we're going to say if the high of the current bar is greater than the range high and bias of the current bar is equal to 0, meaning it hasn't been determined yet, then bias of the current bar is going to be 1, which is going to be long. And we're going to set draw equal to true. Because once price takes that range, we want to know that we can draw out the range high and low. And we're also just going to do this draw.arrow up. And then the object tag, just to make sure it's unique, we're going to do convert to string the current bar plus the string saying arrow up. It's just going to be true, set to 0 for the current bar. Price is going to be the high, and the color is going to be brushes.white. And now we can basically just copy and paste this whole thing for the short condition, where instead we're saying if the low of the current bar is less than the range low and bias of the current bar is equal to 0, then we can set bias of the current bar equal to -1, which is going to be short. Draw is equal to true. We're going to draw a down arrow and update that text to arrow down. We're going to draw it at the low, and the rest is just going to be drawings. So one thing we can do is say if we haven't taken either the high or low by 11:15, we can just, draw some text that says we're not taking any trades. So after this loop, we can say else if we are no longer in the range where we can take the high or the low, and we just were 1 bar ago, and our bias is still 0, so it hasn't been determined even after we've exited the range, then we know that we can't take any trades for the day. So we can say draw.text convert to string current bar. And this tag isn't visible, it's just for the actual object, but the string text is actually going to be visible, so that's going to be no trades on the current or 0 with bar. We're just going to set it to the high of whatever bar we're on. And then we're also just going to set draw equal to true, so even if we don't take the range, we're still going to draw out the range high and low. So lastly, we can say if draw, then we want to draw a line, convert to string the current bar. We can say range high. We want to set this to something like 20 bars ago. Range high is going to be the value. It's going to extend to the current bar or the 0 with index. And that second Y value is also going to be the range high, just a straight line. And we'll just say brushes.yellow for the color. Then just copy and paste and do the same thing for the range low. So change this to range low and change that as well. I just realized I misspelled this as I tried to compile it, so I'm just going to change that to void. Everything should compile. And we also just need to add this false parameter in the set stop loss function to make sure that it is not a simulated stop. And one thing I also forgot to do is basically initiate everything that we defined up here. So in addition to just declaring them as private series, we need to go into this state.configure and basically just initiate everything we said as a new series. And I want to check just to make sure that what we have so far is working. Since we have a couple drawings on there, we should be able to see some of the logic. So mine was called CB unlock, so I'm going to double click it and I'm going to set enable to true and I'm going to apply. And so that seems to be working. We have this range from, we are taking the lowest value and the highest value from 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock. Once price breaks that range, we get that down arrow and we draw out these range highs and lows for the last 20 bars. Same thing here, seems to be working. You got the range high and range low. Once we break it, we get that down arrow. And we can also see a bullish case here, range low, range high. We pierce the high and we get that up arrow. So everything seems to be working up until this point. Now what should be the last thing we have to do is just define everything in our trade range. So remember we have that can trade option. So if that is true, we can just say if can trade, then we want to do our trade range function. So this is one more private void, trade range, and we're going to try to store those values similar to how we did for bias, where we're saying opposite close of the current bar is equal to opposite close of the previous bar, unless we override it, which we will in here. And again, all these get reset with the reset function that we wrote. But we can also say took high low of the current bar is equal to that of the previous bar. And now if we are in our trade window, so if T trade of the current bar is true, and just for reference, we're in this part of the trading view code, and everything is pretty much a direct translation, other than like a few symbols that are different between PineScript and NinjaTrader. But just so you know, that's where we're actually focused on right now. So we're going to do the same thing where we say if we are not using the first retrace criteria, then we don't care about opposite close candles, and we're just going to set it to true. Otherwise, if we do care about it, then what do we need to do? Well, if our bias is true, otherwise, what do we need to do? We need to check if our bias is long and if we've had any down close candles. So close must be less than the open. If that's true, then we can set opposite close of the current bar equal to true. Or if our bias is short or -1 and the close is greater than the open, so we want to see up close candles, then we can also set opposite close to true. Now for the second retrace criteria, again, if we don't care about it in the first place, then we're just going to set the default to true. And this is going to be the took high low variable. If we do care about it, then we're going to enter this loop and say, if our bias is long, and again, we want to see the low of the current candle be lower than the low of the previous candle. If that's true, then we can set took high low of the current bar to true. Just going to copy that for the short. So if our bias is -1 or short, and our high of the current bar is greater than the high of the previous bar, then we can set it to true again. Now what we can do is say if current bar is greater than 3, just to be sure. This is where we're actually going to enter the orders. So if our bias has already been determined to be true, so it was true from 1 bar ago, and we are long, and we have our entry criteria, which is a close above the prior candle's high, and opposite close is true, and took high low criteria is also true. I accidentally did and instead of the 2 ampersands, and we are not yet long. Then we can set our long of the current bar to true, and we can enter with a long. So if we are using stop orders, then what we want to do is enter long stop market. The quantity is going to be this convert to integer of our default quantity, which you can set up when you actually add the strategy to your chart. There's going to be a default quantity option, and so it'll just take that and use that for the actual quantity that's going to be used in the market. The price of our stop order is going to be the high of the current bar, and the signal name, we can just do convert that to string current bar and long. We don't need to use a stop order. We can just do enter long, and we can basically just take everything from that previous enter long and just take out the price since we don't need it. Now for the short condition, if our bias has already been determined to be short or -1, and our entry criteria has been met, so a close below the low of the previous bar, and our opposite close criteria is true, and our took high low close criteria is true, and we are not yet short, then we can set is short of the current bar equal to true. And then I'm just going to copy this whole thing where we are determining if we're using stop orders or not. And instead of enter long, we're just going to do enter short. And these functions are native to NinjaTrader. And I'll just change the tags to say short as well. And for the short criteria, instead of using the high, we're going to be using the low. So I'm going to save and compile. So I went back in the recording and noticed a couple things that need fixing. One is that I moved this opposite close and took high low out of the trade range function and just back into the on bar update right under bias, and did the same thing as well for is short and is long. So we're assigning the current bar's value to the previous value to store instances where it has already been determined. We want to make sure that that is saved and not overwritten on a new bar. I'm pretty sure this was the only change that I made. I may have done 1 or 2 other things, but I'll scroll through the code at the end. This should be its complete and final state. So we can go to a chart and make sure everything's working. So I'm going to right click and go to strategies, and I'm going to enable and apply. And I made sure to check this against the TradingView version, and it seems to be working properly. So we have our range taken, so bias is short. We get these up close candles, price trades through previous lows, and so we're ready to take a short as soon as price closes through a previous low after these retracements. And notice that I don't have the stop orders triggered right here because otherwise it would be set to this low. And I can demonstrate that by going to strategies, turn off, enable, apply. Now I can change these settings. I can check use stop orders, enable again, apply, and now you can see that it's taking that order as soon as price reaches that low. I'm just going to reset it though for now. Click enable and apply. And we have another one here. Price breaks the range, so our bias is short. Retrace, trade through previous low and close through it so we can take a short, close at end of the day. And actually there is one more change that we need to make to the trade range function. So we know when to enter our positions, but we also need to know when to exit. So we have if T trade. So all this will execute if we are within the 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. window. Otherwise, if we're not in that window, we can say else. If the current bar is not in the trade window, but we were in the trade window from 1 bar ago, then we know that we have just exited, and we can just say exit long and exit short. I'm going to compile. And now notice how right here we're exiting at 17 right here. If I go into strategies, disable and then enable again, click apply. Now we're closing right after market close. So this should be the proper behavior. So we can verify again, price takes the range, we're long biased. We get these big retracement candles, price finally closes over a previous 5-minute high. So we enter long, close at the end of the day. We take the range high, retrace with this red candle, take a previous low, close over a previous high, and we enter long, get stopped out. That's perfectly fine. Although we do need to account for the setting that we had where we decide if we want to use fixed risk to reward or not. So if we are using fixed risk to reward, then we want to set our profit target and stop loss. Otherwise, we don't need them. We're just going to hold till close. Obviously, that's way more risky. It's just, obviously that's right. Obviously, that's got way more risk involved. I'm just trying to make it as close to the TradingView version as possible. So if I go to strategies, disable, and now disable use fixed risk to reward and enable it again. Now I can see that we took the trade, didn't get stopped out, and held till the close. If I scroll back further, I can see that we have this range where we didn't take the high or the low by 11:15. And so we have this text that says no trades. That's exactly what we wanted. And again, with fixed risk to reward turned on, we get a short bias, retracement, close through previous low, enter short, get stopped out, perfectly fine. So it seems to be working perfectly in line with the TradingView version. So we are done coding, and now we can check out some of the backtesting and optimization tools that NinjaTrader has to offer. So if I go to new and then strategy analyzer, you'll get this window here where backtest type is set to backtest. Strategy, I want to select CB unlocked. And what I want to do is select MNQ, set to the 5-minute chart. I'm looking at NASDAQ here because our default risk to reward is 25 and 75 points respectively, which is obviously way too large for something like ES. But anyway, 5-minute chart, we can set start date to a couple of years back, see how much data it gives us. Include commission, just to be safe, slippage, we can worry about that later. Run, and I can see a quick summary of the trades with these settings. If I go to analysis and set periods to trades, then I can see a graph showing the cumulative P&L history of each trade. So that should be pretty straightforward. Now, one thing you can do is change the backtest type to optimization. And here we have a few different options where we can basically input a range of values for NinjaTrader to determine what the best settings would have been for a historical period of time. So maybe you want to know whether it's worthwhile to use these retracement criteria. So you can just change this from true to optimize, change this to optimize as well. I might as well just do these as well. Just as an example to see how it plays out, we can select run. And now because we altered all those options, we just ran a few simulations. And if you scroll down here, you can see that we're optimizing based on the maximum profit factor, and it keeps the best 10 results. So we can see them all sorted here. And you can see exactly which settings were changed to get these results by hovering over the results. And you can see exactly what they were, screenshot them, do whatever you want to do. And the same goes for the risk to reward, where you can vary these numbers and see which would have worked best. So for example, maybe you want to vary risk from 25 to say 50 points and increment that by 5. So it'll assess different outcomes at 25 points of risk, 30, 35, etc. And same thing for reward. Maybe you want to do from 50 to, let's say, 100, vary that by 5. And notice that the smaller and more detailed you get with these step values, the more simulations it's going to do, the longer these are going to take. Sometimes these can be very computationally intensive and can take a while to run, but we're just going to keep it simple right now, only run a few. So when I select run, you can see it's going through 66 different possible outcomes and then spits out the best results. And if you want to reset these to not change at all, just change it back so that the beginning and ending values are the same. So it goes beginning value, ending value, and then step value. So I'm going to change it back to 25 and 75. And the reason I wanted to make these times as integers is because it would make it a little easier for us to optimize different time windows. I'll just vary this by 1 hour. So I'll say 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0 for hours, minutes, and seconds. And trade window end, maybe we could change this from, say, 2 o'clock p.m. to maybe 6 o'clock p.m. and also vary that by an hour. If I click run, then I'll optimize based on that. And for those that haven't used this before, you can change what you're optimizing on and even make some custom optimization options. As far as I'm aware, I haven't done that myself, but there's plenty to go through. Max net profit, max R squared, Sharpe ratio, and all that stuff. Definitely a really cool tool in the NinjaTrader platform. But anyway, I'll do one last scroll through all the code. I'll go slow so you can pause it whenever you want. I'm choosing not to put this in the description because this is a full-fledged trading bot, meaning that if someone were to copy and paste all this stuff and throw it on an account, it would be able to take live trades. It does default to a simulated account, but obviously anyone can change that to a prop account or a live account, but I really don't want people throwing this on an account without understanding how this works. So I'm making this tutorial as thorough as possible to be able to have the foundation to implement this safely and know what you're doing, and hopefully inspire you to, tackle other projects and make your own ideas into trading bots. But I hope that was helpful, the whole walkthrough from TradingView logic to translating everything to Ninja and going through all the backtesting and optimization stuff that they have to offer. That's pretty much all I wanted to cover. If you found this helpful, please feel free to leave a like. Let me know if you want to see more of this stuff in the future. I'll probably be doing more coding videos like this to start the year, as I have a bunch of indicators lined up that I've made in recent months and haven't covered on here yet. So I'll probably be working on that in the coming weeks. But that's pretty much all I have for now. If you have any questions about the code, please feel free to leave a comment, reach out on Twitter or Discord or anything. But that is all I have for now, and I'll see you next time.